Yeah, talk to Rex. He's coming on. Got a profile. Woo! We're batting 1,000 here.
Woo! Oh, man.
You know, last show you had me laughing so hard. You said, "Dang varmint."
Well, you rub off on me. Well, I mean, you just sent me a voice note early on, and you emulated the English accent so beautifully. Bloody hell!
Hey, look at that. There's Rex.
Let me quickly invite him on.
All right, cool. I'm going to
There we
take
go.
the weight bot off.
There we go. Ah, how sweet this sound. Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you as we congregate together at this hour every given day of the week. On this given day of the week. Every given day of the week? This day of the week. You know what I mean. This is Doing It Sober Live, courtesy on Fireside Chat from South Africa. My name is Chris Nell, and opposite me, the lady who puts the bell in Southern Bell, Daniela Park. It's a pleasure to have your company. And without hesitation, our guest has joined us. Let's make him feel special by introducing him, shall we? Now, for our regular listeners, if we should have any, which I'm sure we do have in droves, and for our new audiences, if you have been following this show for any given measure of time, you'll have come to learn that child neglect and often abuse may have led to the breeding of drug addiction. Tiresome as it may have seemed to some in society, hearing the same thing time and time again, the curtain is pulled back and the faults of individuals are laid at their very feet. And in starker contrast, judgment is reserved purely by the court judge and the judgment of the Deity. What is overlooked by society, we should add, is how we, the sober and the daring, consistently raise issues without the help of normies, but rather through one another. Why? Because we become more informed, we become more inspired, and less judgmental. However, what we do thrive in is speaking the uncomfortable truth, and you can't get that on a news masthead. And the truth is, you, the normies, can't hurt us anymore. And thus, Reverend Rex is a disciple in this premise. A former heroin addict and a current certified life coach among many titles in his oeuvre, he has spent his time teaching many former addicts and the like about self-love through many practices upon which he will elaborate. He has expanded on his skills through means of a podcast now entitled No Love, and he's currently underway spearheading prep for a coast-to-coast biking event, which is due to kick off in the month of June, the year of our Lord, 2023. Reverend, it's a pleasure to make your acquaintance. Welcome to Doing It Sober Live.
Thank you for having me. It's awesome to be here. Did you say you're in South Africa?
That's correct.
That's awesome. That's actually one of the places I would like to visit someday.
Not in this current climate. But
I don't feel like the world's going to get any better. But I mean, I hope it does, but I tell my kids all the time, I'm like, enjoy it because this is probably as good as it's ever going to be.
I'm right
said
there with
people
you.
in the previous century. Said people in the previous century as well.
Well, yeah.
But let's remain optimistic, yeah?
I'm a reverend. I think we're living in some pretty heavy times right now, but that's for another show, another time.
Sure.
Thanks for having me on. It's great to be here. I've watched a couple of your shows. I don't like to do a lot of investigation on the podcast that I'm going to be a guest on because I like it to be organic. Like I don't like to see if there's an agenda or, I like to let it just kind of flow.
That's the name of the game. You're speaking our language, son.
And I discovered you guys, though. I watched Tim Logden's episode. He's
Tim, yeah.
He's a good friend of mine. He was actually one of the first guests.
Sweet chap. Love him to pieces.
Yeah, he's a really good dude doing a lot of really good things.
Yeah.
Needless to say.
So, what would you like to talk about?
Well, I would like to talk. Let's start with, obviously addiction is part of your story, but, today we're talking about suicide along with everything else, but suicide is part of your life as well. Also,
It is. It's a huge part of my story. Let me just give you a brief run through. I was born and raised in South New Jersey, on the East Coast, U.S. Um, and for the first 5 or 6 years of my life were pretty okay. I don't really have any memory of them. But when I was 6 years old, I spent my sixth birthday in a courtroom with the guy I thought was my dad, um, until the end of the day when the judge said something along the lines of like, "Well, it looks like he's not coming, so I award the adoption complete. He's yours until he's 18." And like I'm sitting there 6 years old, like, what does all this mean, right? I mean, I knew what adoption was because there was other kids in my school who got made fun of for being adopted.
Oh,
Um, and So my dad's telling me on the way home, he's like, "I'm not your real father." He's like, "I'm your real mother's father. I'm your grandfather on your mom's side." He's like, "And your real father was just released from prison in Texas a few months ago and was supposed to be here to claim custody, and he didn't show."
oh,
About 2 weeks later, he asked me, he said, "Hey, if you had to choose who you were going to live with, me or your mom, who would you pick?" And, I'm a 6 year old boy. My dad's my hero. So I'm like, "Well, you." That turned out to be the most important decision I'd ever made in my life because a couple weeks later, we ended up moving in with the woman who would be my stepmom and who for the next years would be the greatest abuser in my life.
oh,
Um, Month or
Shit.
so of moving in with her. I don't really remember the circumstances. I just remember it ending. She had my head pinned into the corner of a couch and she was beating
oh,
me on the back of the head with a ladle. And
wow.
my younger stepbrother was screaming at her to stop, and she stopped. She tried to get the bleeding to stop. She couldn't. So we had to go to the hospital. And on the way to the hospital, we had to go see my dad first. He was head groundsman at the local college that was in my hometown. And we had to go get the insurance card. And
Oh my
so
goodness.
the story was is that I was to tell him that I was running through the kitchen, and I slipped on the freshly waxed linoleum floor and hit my head on the dishwasher, and it needed stitches. And so we get the insurance card, and we're on the way to the hospital, and she pulls over in a dirt lot, and she turns the car off, and she turns around and looks at me in the back seat, and she said, "If you ever tell anyone the things that go on in our house, I'll kill your dad." And
Jesus.
that was exactly what she needed to say to get me to believe her. And I never told. Uh, the
Hmm.
abuse wasn't just physical. My two older step siblings sexually molested me. She used to
Wow.
take kitchen utensils and shove them up my butt and snap me on the
Oh,
testicles with rubber bands.
fuck.
When my dad would go to his weekend warrior for the National Guard thing, there were times when she'd put me in a long sleeve and duct tape my hands together and throw me in a closet in the basement for the weekend. Uh, that went on. The sexual abuse went on until I was about 9. I fought back on that. They came into my room one night and I had a knife, and that ended. The physical abuse,
Hmm.
it slowed down, but it got more intense. The psychological abuse was terrible. And then when I was 12 years old, I fought back. I beat the shit out of her. My dad, who claimed to have never known what was going on, which I don't really disbelieve because he was a career army man who was in Korea for the entire Korean War. He was in Vietnam and Cambodia before the Vietnam War when the French were there. And then he did
Hmm.
three and a
Hmm.
half years in Vietnam. Like, I can't imagine his level of PTSD that he had, you know.
Yeah.
Plus, he came from his mother, he was born at the end of the roaring 20s, and his mom dumped him with her mom and went off to just be an alcoholic slut. So like, there's CPTSD, you know what I mean? Like and then like
Hmm.
now
Hmm.
later in life, I can see this and it just adds to the level of forgiveness and my love for him.
Yeah.
Um, but
Good on you.
I thank you. It took a lot of work to get there. Um,
Naturally.
I got kicked out for fighting back. It was the middle of winter in
Hmm.
the Northeast and it was cold, and I had friends that I stayed with, off and on over the next few years. When I was 13 and a half, I was staying at a motel in Philadelphia where
Oh.
a transvestite prostitute and one of their Johns kicked in my motel room, beat me, and raped me and left me for dead. My best
Jesus
friend found
Christ.
me. I woke up in the hospital with 14 stitches in my butt and a jaw wired shut.
Wow. That's
And when I
intense.
got kicked out at 12, I kind of almost, I had already been exposed to, my older brother was a pretty bad drug addict and alcoholic. He's got about 5 years on me ahead of, like, older than me. So I had already been exposed to what shooting up was, what cocaine was. I'd already been drunk. I smoked pot for the first time when I was 6 years old. Uh, I started drinking around 11, but when I got kicked out of my house, me and my friend were looking for some cocaine, and we ended up running into a heroin dealer. And first time I did it, I was like, man, this is it. This is what I want to do forever. It shut everything up. It took all the pain. It shut up all the voices. It made me feel confident. It made me feel like I wasn't such a piece of shit. Because even though I did nothing at all to deserve any of the stuff that happened to me, that doesn't matter to your head. In my head, it was all my fault. If I hadn't done this, if I hadn't done that, if I'd have been better at this, or if I'd have done this better. Plus on the fact that from 6 to 12, some of the most formative years of your life, as far as developmentally, I was being told that I was a worthless piece of shit who was never going to be nothing but a junkie convict like his father. So
yeah, tainted.
Yeah, you believe that. It becomes
Very
the
much.
mantra, and for myself, I spent the rest of, like, my days almost like trying to prove them right. New Jersey sucked. I got into a motorcycle accident after my senior year of high school. I broke 27 bones, was in a coma for 73 days, was in traction for 8.5 weeks. I had to learn how to walk again. And I got a settlement check, and I took my girlfriend at the time to our first Dead show, and Grateful Dead show. And I met some punk rock hippie kids, and because I was a hardcore punk rock kid in the 80s.
As was the culture. Sure.
Yeah, heavy metal, punk rock. Growing up in the Reagan era, it's made some good music. You know what I mean? There's some good.
Yeah, Ramones, Black Flag.
Yes, Dead Kennedy.
Circle Jerks.
Yep. Minor Threat. And so, like, when she was like, I was like, I'll take you to do anything you want to do, whatever you want to do within driving distance. She was like, I want to go to the Dead show at the Spectrum in Philly. And I was like, anything but that. I was like, I am not trying to go see some burnout hippie band, some old country music.
Shit.
But she wanted to go, I said I would. So we went, we got tickets, and I met some punk rock kids on the lot. And I smoked good weed for the first time, kind bud. I thought it was laced. Like, they all started laughing at me. I smoked it, and I was like, "Oh my god, what is this?" They're like, "Weed." I was like, "What's it laced with?" They're like, "Weed." I'm like, "Oh my god." I didn't want to be a heroin addict anymore. After the act,
Right.
So my senior year in high school, I kind of got on track. I got off heroin. I was just drinking and smoking weed and trying to just do the high school thing, because I was a really good baseball player. I wanted to get a ride for baseball. I got a ride to Rutgers, and
wow.
it was a walk-on scholarship because I didn't actually graduate because I didn't have enough credits. I had to do GED thing and all this blah 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 blah. But I still got my walk-on, and it was like 2 weeks before the start of the academic school year when I got my accident. So I was on painkillers, obviously, because I was just in a major motorcycle accident. But I didn't want to be on them anymore, and so I went to these shows, and I met these kids. And back then, back in the 90s and the 80s, there used to be Grateful Dead business cards. And on the front, it said 1-900 Run Dead. And it was like, next show, next venue, next blah, blah, blah. And you could call that, and it would tell you where the next 3 shows were and what city they were in and the dates they were on. So this kid, Sprocket, he hands me one of these cards. He's like, here's my business card, bro. You'll always be able to find me. And I was like, nah, I can't leave. I got a baby, because I had a kid when I was a teenager. And my lady didn't want to go. I wanted to go, but she didn't want to go. And they left after 3 days. And after 3 days, man, I was hooked. I mean, I swallowed that hook. It was just a matter of getting me in the boat. And I left like 3 days after they did, and I caught up with them in Wisconsin. I never looked back.
Wow.
I had lost custody of my daughter from being a fuck up, addict and junkie. I was literally, I think, to my knowledge, and I grew up there. I was the first homeless person in my hometown since the Depression.
Oh, man.
Yeah, and everybody knew it, and nobody talked about it because when I got kicked out, I grew up around with a bunch of kids in school who were in the system, and in New Jersey, it's called DYFS, Division of Youth and Family Services. They just call it DYFS for short. I didn't want to be involved in DYFS because DYFS is they had a routine. If you were from South New Jersey and you had horrible parents and they took you away from your parents and put you in a foster home all the way on the other side of the state. And I didn't want that. So I told my dad, I said, check this out. I said, I'll leave and I won't say nothing. But as far as everybody knows, I still live here. And he was cool with that because he didn't want the system knocking on our door, you know what I mean? And
Right.
it was this beautiful lie that worked for everybody, right? And so fast forward, I end up in Boulder, Colorado. In 1994, I meet my best friend and the people who are still some of my closest friends today. But it was a short amount of time, you know, as addiction always works. It wasn't even a year, and I was in Boulder, and I was strung out. I went to San Francisco to some Dead shows, and I got really high on a lot of LSD. And someone was like, "Oh, hey man, heroin makes you come down," and I was like, "Sign me up." And I was off to the races. Within a few months, I was selling anywhere between 3/4 pounds of heroin and cocaine every 3 days for the Tijuana cartel.
No way.
Yeah, I was off the deep end, and I just man, I was running. I was running at full speed, and I was raised Catholic. So in the back of my mind, there's always that if you kill yourself, you're going to go to hell because there's no way to redeem yourself for suicide. It's like the unforgivable sin, right? And but I wanted to die. I knew that I couldn't stop, and I didn't want to go to jail. So I just put the pedal to the floor and didn't look back. And it took about 2 years, and I was up to doing about 3.5 to 5 grams of heroin a day. I was doing about a half ounce of cocaine a day. I weighed about 140 pounds. Yeah, it was all bad. And you know, I got busted. I got busted with 27 federal indictments and a RICO Act, organized crime act.
Shit.
And it saved your life, didn't it?
26 people got arrested in 3 states because they had my dope was under investigation for 15 months before they figured out it was me because I was just living the homeless life. I had a house that I had bought in South Boulder, but I didn't ever stay there. I had this little $200 a month room up on the hill in Boulder that I dealt out of, but I didn't sell heroin. I sold weed and mushrooms, and I fronted out all the heroin to other people. Like people who sold weed for me, they would come dope sick, and I'd be like, "Oh, hey, come on, I'll buy you some." And I'd go to the people who were selling my shit and buy some, like because I didn't want anybody to know it was me.
Yeah.
And when they finally figured out it was me, man, they bugged everything within a quarter mile of my house because I didn't use a landline. I used payphones. Nobody came to my house except for the people that I fronted to. I had a little Volkswagen Rabbit that they put a tracker on, and they tracked me to the old airport in Denver, Stapleton, and watched me get on a flight to California. And you know, this is pre 9/11. I knew there was an airline company in Colorado. I think it was called North. I don't remember what it was called, but I know it was $69 one way. So it was like $170 or $140, $150 round trip to Oakland from Colorado Springs. And so I would catch a little flight down to Colorado Springs and then boom, jump from Colorado Springs to California, put all the dope in my pocket. I was literally in my pocket. I would get on the plane, and I knew all the stewardesses. I was always throwing around tips, and I for a large majority of my life, I collected comic books, and I used to send them home to my mom, so she would catalog them and box them for me at her house in New Jersey. So I would go out and I would take comic books with me, and it explained I had all these stewardesses because it was usually the same 3 on every flight because I planned it that way when my trips, and they thought that I was like this comic book guru who was like making millions of dollars selling comic books because I always had this big wad of cash. But I was a licensed.
You were a great manipulator, what you were.
Yes, and
the great con man.
They got me with. 27 federal indictments and a RICO Act, and I beat it on a technicality. They busted me. There was some kind of border dispute going on in around Labor Day '96 between the Tijuana cartel and the Sinaloa cartel, which the Sinaloa cartel would end up taking it over.
And this is when the two brothers, Peter and Jay Flores, would be pushing drugs for El Chapo Guzman.
Yep. Well, no. Chapo was in charge of Sinaloa. He wanted Tijuana.
That's what I meant.
Yep. And I didn't know all this. I'm just a junkie in Colorado. You know what I'm saying? I go out to California, meet my dude who's a gangbanger. He was a member of the 18th Street Sureños out of East LA. Yeah. And they were like the football cartel. And man, when I met the guy from the representative from the cartel, he interviewed me like it was a job. And he asked for personal references. I gave him my mom's phone number and address and my dad's, and he called them right there and was just like, hey, we're interviewing your son for a job interview. We think he's a really good candidate. We just want to make sure he is who he is, and da-da-da-da. After they were done, they were like, cool, we know who your mom is. We know who your dad is. We know where they are. We know how to reach them. If you rip us off, snitch on us, or fuck us in any way, we will kill them. Then we will kill you. Okay, I'm from a working class Irish family. I got a big family. So snitching was off the table when I got busted. I sat in a federal holding room. It was like an interview room with an air mattress and a TV that had a VCR in it with a bunch of movies. They were bringing me like fast food 3 times a day. They take me out once an hour to smoke. They were bringing me methadone. They were like grooming me. They wanted me to snitch. My lawyer finally finds me after 4 days. Because I had a really good lawyer on retainer. I had $50,000 of my dollars in his safe to make sure that I, got out of anything. Mm-hmm. He walks into the room and the first words out of his mouth are, "You're fucked." And I was like, he was like, "You better start talking." I said, "I ain't talking shit." He's like, "You're looking at 986 years.
Son of a bitch.
The way federal sentencing works is it's done on a point system. Well, once the RICO Act, Organized Crime Act is involved, then they take the highest point of every felony that you have and they add it all together. Oh. And then there's like some other multiplier depending upon like circumstances in the case. So with all mine together, I'm looking at 1,000 years, just shy of 1,000 years. And I'm like, well, I bought the ticket. Like I knew that this was a possibility. I'm not a snitch. It's just not in my blood. I used to get my ass beat by my mom for tattling on my brother. I don't tell. It's just not in my blood. So we sat there for a few days combing over this warrant. And he left it with me. I think it was the end of the third day. And he left it with me. And there was this the front page of the warrant, there was just something that like, every time we read it, just didn't sit with me. So he comes back the next morning and I said, hey, this right here. I says, it says warrant to be served on the dwelling or occupancy owned by Thomas Francis Toll Jr. That's my birth name. That's in my book and I'll explain that in a little bit. I said, what if the house isn't in my name? And he's like, what do you mean? And I said, I used to date this girl and I was friends with her grandma. Now her grandma's in the state hospital because she had a mental breakdown. And she ain't ever getting out. I was like, so I put in her name. I was like, and I just put $200 on her books every month to pay rent. And he's like, his eyes lit up like the Rockefeller Plaza Christmas tree, man. And he said, I'll be back. We went to court 2 days later. They went into chambers. The federal prosecutor stomped his feet, barked, this is an atrocity of law. And the judge told him, he says, well, do your due diligence next time and make sure that all your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted. And he was like, case dismissed. Boom. Damn. 27 people, including myself, walked out of 3 state federal courtrooms because every warrant was pinnacle on mine. Every other warrant that was served was based off of the warrant that was served on. Hugely. My reward was the cartel. This is what I believe is they didn't kill me. But as I'm leaving the courtroom, there's 2 Boulder County sheriffs and they're like, we have a warrant for your arrest. And I'm like, for what? No. They're like, possession of Schedule 1 controlled substance. So I'm like, here we go. They take me to Boulder County Jail. Allegedly, now remember, I told you I was doing about 5 grams of heroin a day. my cottons in my spoon had more than a quarter gram in them. They told me they found a tenth of a gram, a little tiny piece of heroin in the change pocket of my jeans when they were searching my clothes and booking. And they were charging me with a class 5 felony. They gave me 3 years in prison for that. So that set off my prison career. Over the next 10 years, I was out for a total of about 8 months. I kept going back with 1 and 2 years or violating parole. I have 8 felony convictions, all for a total of 0.3 of a gram of heroin. And it's dirty spoons, dirty needle. Every time I'd get busted with a dirty spoon or a dirty needle, they'd give me possession under a gram. Class 6 felony in Colorado. Now, keep this in mind. In the state of Colorado, if you're busted with 4 grams of heroin now as personal use, it's a misdemeanor.
Whoa.
But they won't do nothing. They won't do nothing about my record. Right.
That's freaking sad.
It is. It's horrible. But at the end of that 10 years, the last time I went back, I got out August 28th of 2004. And by October 23rd, I was sitting back in booking with a brand new felony. 60 pounds lighter than I was 2 months before. And in Boulder County Jail, you get bracelets so you can order your commissary. But it takes a few days to go through classification to figure out what your security level is going to be. I hadn't even had my bracelet yet, and I had a crate full of commissary and hygiene, because going to Boulder County Jail for me at this point was like going to a family reunion. And they were like, oh my God, what do you need? Here you go, man, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just laying there dope sick. And I have this, what in AA we call a moment of clarity, because I identify with Alcoholics Anonymous because 99% of my relapses began because I thought I could drink.
Yeah.
And AA was there for me in the beginning. So I will always be, and plus Heroin Anonymous, we work out of the AA Big Book.
Right.
But, and I'm laying there and I had this moment of clarity, and I'm like, man, you're way more comfortable in here than out there. Because in here it's safe. Like inside the prison walls, for someone who has never been able to trust anyone their entire life, prison's like the only place in the world where your word really still counts. Like if you don't have your word on a prison yard, if you're not an integrous person who does what they say they're going to do, then you're a piece of shit. You got nothing. You're a loner who is a victim. So, and convicts have a certain code. We don't violate women, children, or elderly. We don't victimize women, children, or elderly, but everything else is on the table. You know what I mean? So like that kind of defines who a good dude is in prison. If you're not a pedophile, if you're not a rapist, if you didn't jack somebody or your own grandmother, and you're not a snitch, and your word is good. So I started thinking about this, and I was like, man, I need to really change my paradigm around the way I'm thinking about life. But I didn't quite yet identify with the alcoholic part of my story. So for the next year, ended up going back to prison. I changed my whole thing, because when I had been in prison before, I was the dude hustling on the yard. If there was somebody talking shit, I was the one who fought them. In prison, we call it a bullet. You just point your gun, and I was the bullet that shot out of it. Wow. And so I was like, this is my life. I need to build a name for myself in here so that when I get too old that I can't do this anymore, I won't need to. You know what I mean? And
yeah,
that's a fucked up way to think. Just sidebar. Anybody out there who is, anybody out there who's listening to this who is institutionalized or thinking there's no way out, there's easily a way out, and we're gonna get there. Just keep hanging there. But like I said, I in the back of my mind, I was like, well, I'll be okay just as long as I drink. I'm not gonna do heroin anymore because I know what heroin leads to, and I'm cool when I drink. Blah 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 blah. This was the narrative that I said to myself in prison for a year. I was going to AA meetings. I didn't fight anymore. Like even the chief of security, the day I hit the yard, she's like, so who's on my yard? She was like, is it the dumbass or is it the person that I hear is trying to change his life? I said, I'm trying to change my life. Within 2 months of being on that yard, I was the person who cleaned the warden's office. That's how much a change I made.
Wow.
And So I got paroled early for the first time ever in my life. Because usually they were like, "You got 2 years." I'm like, "All right, cool. See you in 2 years, everybody." Like it was like that. And I got out November 1st. By November 3rd, I was smoking pot. By November 5th, I was drinking. By Thanksgiving, I was strung out. And they're illegal in Colorado now, thank God. But there used to be these drinks that you could get at the head shops where you just drink it and wait about an hour and you drink a liter of water. And then when you peed, like the water, it like turned all your insides basically into gelatin that secreted all of the stuff that needed to be in your urine to show that it was actually real urine, like creatinine and different amino acids and stuff like that. So I was pissing clean for my UAs on parole, but I was losing weight at an alarming rate. And my parole officer was like, "What's going on? What's going on?" He's like leaving me messages at my house. I'm on an ankle monitor, on house arrest, like one of those ones where you got the box in your house and you got the monitor and you can't go 100 feet from your house. The liquor store across the street, the front door that opened that I could take one step inside was 99 feet from my house, or 99 yards from my house. I had a 100-yard range. So I'd go and I'd be like, hand them a list and they'd go get it. I'd give them cash and I'd walk home. Jesus. But I was allowed to leave from 7 to 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. So that's when I go get my dope and do my hustling or go to work. And I had my parole. I was manufacturing documents on Google Word. I was copying and pasting hospital letterhead and forging doctor signatures of real oncologists from Boulder Community Hospital and CU Campus Hospital in Denver. I had my parole officer and my job convinced that I had a tumor on the diaphragm of my stomach and that when I ate or drank, it caused me to vomit and I couldn't hold anything down. That's why I was losing weight. And that's why I looked so bad, because I was fighting cancer and blah, blah, blah. So I had like my parole officer's like, "I got my prayer group praying for you." Like, I'm like, I mean, I can laugh about it now. Him and I have laughed. He passed on, but him and I laughed about it, later on. But I wake up on my birthday, which is in January, and we had a party the night before, which the chick I was renting a room from was like 21. Her boyfriend was 19. There was a bunch of high school kids. I mean, this house was like, it looked like something out of a movie. Like people were laid out like slats on the floor. Lord. Empty bottles everywhere. Oh, I forgot to mention the fact that not only was I on the ankle monitor and house arrest, but I lived 9 blocks away from the parole office. And I had another moment of clarity. And I was like, what am I doing? I was like, "You're going to end up in prison for the rest of your life." And I went to my parole officer and I said, "Hey," I told him the whole story about everything that had been going on, what I've been lying about. He was so in disbelief that he had me go immediately across the street to the halfway house and do one of them little dipstick UA tests. Man, I came back hot for everything but barbiturates. I was hot for cocaine, meth, because I was doing ecstasy, heroin, cocaine, THC. And he was like, "Dude," he was like, "You're good." He was like, "You had us fooled." He's like, "If you would have played this out for the next 8 months, you would have walked off free." And I was like, "I know." I was like, "That's why I'm here." And he sent me to detox. There was a bunch of stuff that led up to that, but can't tell everything in the book.
Sure.
But I ended up in detox, and in detox, I ended up meeting my first sponsor. I come out of like a 3 or 4 day withdrawal stupor, and I have these business cards with just the name Raymond. Call anytime with like happy smiley face emojis on it. And I'm like, oh my, and a phone number. And I'm like, oh my God, I met a new drug dealer. I like tear them up, throw them away. Later on that night, this like total like metrosexual, like almost like a runway model looking dude, but like in his 50s, like comes walking in. He's like, "Hey, what's up, bro? How you doing?" And I'm like, "Do I know you?" He's like, "It's Raymond." And I'm like, "Bro," I was like, "I appreciate you, man." I was like, "But I'm really trying to get my shit together." He starts laughing. He's like, "Do you not remember me?" I'm like, "No, bro." I was like, "I don't." And he starts laughing. He was like, "Well, I'm your sponsor." And he hands me a big book. And I'm like, and I was like, "Oh my God." I was like, "Okay." And we sat down and we talked. The detox that I was in was part of a mental health facility, but not facility, but like a complex on the corner of on a corner in Boulder, and his cleaning company did all the after hours cleaning. So while they were working, he was on site supervisor. He would just come over to the detox and hang out and talk to drunks. And like he was like a living 12 stepper. And and we
great. Love it.
yeah,
My favorite.
we talked absolutely. And he him and this other guy who worked there, they would bring me copies of like Joe and Charlie tapes, or Don Pritz tapes, or Mickey Musset, or like tapes of like Dr. Bob speaking, or Bill Wilson speaking, and they were like grainy, sound like listening to old records on like an old phonograph.
Yeah,
like,
I love that sound. That analog sound.
Sponge, bro. I was sucking it up. And
wonderful.
Man, yeah, it was awesome. It was amazing. And I just fell in love with the program. And you know, like when you have a raw story, it hits a lot of people. And
it does.
More people want to hear it.
Yeah.
And they want you to like show up and share it. And I got kind of put on a pretty high pedestal with a group of friends in AA. And then some things happened, and my past caught up with me, and I ended up catching a felony in sobriety for something that I had done almost 10 years prior.
Wow.
And
come on.
But when I was in New Jersey taking care of my mom, which was a miracle in and of itself. But Louisville Police Department called me in Louisville, Colorado. And it's in Boulder County. And they're like, hey, this is Louisville Police Department. And I was like, hey, are you calling about the email that I sent John? Because what had happened was almost 10 years prior, I was living with someone who was in the program with me, and he was an active alcoholic. And he was in Las Vegas gambling his life away and wouldn't answer the phone and wouldn't pay his rent. So we went to his room, took a deposit slip and a check out of his checking book, deposited $800 into his account, and wrote a check for $1,200 and paid the rent because his portion was a third of the $1,200. 10 years later, not quite, but almost, 2008. I remember it when I'm driving to New Jersey. So I stop at a truck stop, buy an internet card, and I send this email, and I'm like, hey man, whatever you want me to do to make this right. I was like, blah, 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 blah. I was like, but I did forge your name, and I forgot to tell you about it. And it's weighing on me. I don't want to drink.
God.
And he called the fucking cops. And so they call me, and they're like, you're admitting to it? I was like, well, yeah, you obviously have the email. I was like, it's an amends. It's 9th step. I said I would do whatever it is that he wanted me to do. I was like, if this is what he wants me to do, then this is what I'm doing. That's right. How important is my sobriety, right? Mm-hmm. And fortunately, a bunch of people went to bat, and I just got probation, and I successfully completed it ahead of time. They kicked me off. They're like, dude, go home. You don't need to be here. It's like,
thank God.
But I was pretending. I was being honest outwardly and telling everybody all my raw shit because, like, oh yeah, you know, like I'm fucking Joe Recovery. You know what I mean? I came from this far, and look at me now. And
yeah,
people were like, oh, if you want what we have, do what we do. And I was like, okay, well, I want what this guy has, and he's got a wife and kids and a house and a mortgage, and so does this guy and this guy and this guy. So I started dating seriously, and I met a woman, fell in love with her kids, which I thought meant that I was in love with her too. We ended up getting married. And at the same time, I had invested some money in a medical marijuana dispensary. And at this point, 2 years in, I was making between like $15,000 and $25,000 a month. Plus, I was playing poker professionally on the cash circuit around the country, speaking at AA meetings and HA conferences and conventions and stuff. And man, I thought I was the shit.
Oh yeah.
And then in 2010, Colorado changed the law, said felons can't have nothing to do with it anymore. And they took my business away, and my business partners fucked me out of all the money that they owed me. And my wife cheated on me.
And triple whammy.
He's got a funny sense of humor, doesn't he?
That's called a hat trick.
You know, there's my wife goes to adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families, and you know, I've always heard the saying that God will never give you more in a day than you can handle. Well, they added to it. They said, but he rarely gives you less. And I can relate to that, you know. And so for the next, I don't know, 8-10 months, I was in a prelapse. Everything ended with me relapsing like 2 weeks before my 6-year anniversary. Um, and it was a roller coaster, man. It was. I didn't want to sell drugs. I burned through my savings within like 4 or 5 weeks. So I started
Man.
pawning off my possessions um, that I had saved from the foreclosure. Uh, I had a $1.25 million house that we bought on short sale for like 450,000. It got foreclosed. Like my new truck, her uh, what do they call it? Mini Cooper. Like, I mean, we were living we weren't living above our means, but we were like living ghetto fabulous. Like,
Right.
absolutely. Like, there was no real savings. I didn't start saving until she cheated on me. And I was, to me, that was the beginning of the end. I'm like, so I just started scrolling money away that she didn't know about.
Yeah.
And, so as I'm pawning off my possessions, I pawned a bike that I had bought while I was when I was married and sober, and it turned out to be stolen. And the DA said, with my criminal record, there was no way that I had no knowledge that the bike was stolen. Apparently, some family went on a 6-month cruise and their house got robbed. And the guy who robbed their house like sold all their shit on Craigslist on a fake account.
Jesus.
And so when I took the bike to the police station to have it registered, it came back clean. And but I go to jail for a few months, get out, relapse again, go to my probation officer, and I'm like, hey, can I get clean? I go to the halfway house to get a bed there, and I end up getting arrested for something that happened a year prior. And when I got out of jail, I stayed clean for a few weeks, and then I relapsed again. And some things, it's a long story about what I think it was, but something had changed inside my head on this relapse where heroin didn't work anymore. See, when I first did heroin back in 1996, I've always viewed heroin as a woman, as a feminine kind of chaotic energy, and I've always called her my mistress. And for 27 years, she was faithful because we had this agreement. She said, "I will take away all the pain. I will numb all the hurt, silence all the voices, and in return, you just have to give me everything." And I was like, "All right, cool. Where do I sign?" And I signed in blood. And and now, fast forward, I'm 39 years old, 27 years in, and every time I get high, the voices get louder, and the hurt is deeper. And I'm like, what the fuck is going on? And for the first time in my life, I really started contemplating taking my own life. And it wasn't because I was depressed. It wasn't because, like, I'd been sober. I'd lived with the voices. You know what I mean? I knew that there was other ways around it. My thing is I didn't think I could ever stay sober. I didn't think that I could ever stay clean. And because I really truly believed in my heart that I was one of those people that it says in How It Works that was incapable of being honest with themselves. And
there are such unfortunates.
There are such unfortunates. And I didn't think that I was at fault, and I believed that I was one of those. And so I spent a bunch of time up in the foothills, up in the mountains, meditating and praying and asking for a sign that I was making the wrong decision, and nothing came. If anything, I felt like I was being it almost felt like this warm embrace was like, nope, you're okay. You're going to be all right. It's the right choice. And my dealer was an old friend of mine, someone I'd known for 20 plus years. And I was homeless, as I always am when I start to use, because homeless people are invisible, especially in Boulder. Boulder has the best dressed and most classy homeless in the world. But he would let me stay at his house when it snowed or rained really hard. And so I decided that I was going to do myself in with an intentional overdose. I always said up to this point that if there was ever a theme song for my life, it would be Heroin by the Velvet Underground. It's my wife and it's my life. It'll be the death of me. And
ironically, Scott Weiland would meet his sorry end at the same formula.
Yeah. So I started praying for snow. And on October 27th, 2013, it snowed. And I went over to David's and I was like, hey, man, I got a custody who wants a couple grams in the morning. I was like, I'll come pay you. He's like, yeah, you're good, man. Don't trip. In front of me all the time. But at this point, I wasn't really doing anything. Like, it was strictly maintenance. I was probably doing maybe a quarter gram every 4 or 5 days. Like, it was just enough that I wasn't sick. I didn't want to be getting high anymore. And because when I was high and the voices got louder, then I felt like even more of a piece of shit. So at this point, I just didn't want to be sick. There was no nod, no enjoyment whatsoever. And so he fronted me the 2 grams, and I was like, hey, man, I was like, it's snowing. You mind if I crash? He's like, yeah, no. He's like, such and such are here too. And they're upstairs right now. They'll be down. So they came down. We made dinner, watched a movie. They watched a movie. I sat there thinking about, when is this movie going to be over so I can excuse myself to go take a bath? And I was thinking about what I was about to do. And so the movie ended, and they're like, hey, let's watch part 2. And I was like, yeah, you guys go ahead. I was like, hey, I've seen it. Can I go take a bath? And my boy's like, yeah, man, go ahead. And I went upstairs. I lit some candles because he was like, yeah, there's candles. And I had brought some candles just in case. And I had made a playlist on my phone on Spotify. And ran the bath. And as soon as the bath was ready, I stuck my head out. I was like, hey, man, anybody need to use the head before I go in? And they're like, no, you're good. And I had already fixed up the 2 shots. I got in the tub, hit play on the playlist, and last thing I remember is just fading out listening to the Velvet Underground. And thankfully, by the grace of God, and a host of angels that were there to meet me, it was not my time. Like, they were angry. Like, I remember seeing female faces. Like, that's a whole other story of who I think they were, but that's in the book. They looked angry that I was there. You know what I mean? Like, I felt like almost like they were looking at me like, what the fuck are you doing here? Like, it is not your time. Thing. Yes, yeah. And I felt like there was a battle raging around me. And like later, through a lot of meditation and like really introspection, I feel like I was being surrounded by past selves, and they were like fighting off this horde of demons who were like there to collect my soul. And I woke up, and there's my friends above me, like crying, hugging. Oh my God. Like, and the next morning I went and turned myself in because I was on the run from probation, because you never feel like such a failure as the morning after a failed suicide attempt. But
interesting.
Something had
I can relate.
I'm sorry to hear that, but you understand.
Absolutely.
Something had changed. Like, I knew, kind of, at least in my head at this point, that I would eat a bullet before I ever put a needle in my arm again. And I said, I'm not going to be able to do that out here because temptation is too great and I am too weak. I can't do this on my own. I was like, God, please give me the strength just to get to probation. And I hitchhiked, and I started getting sick, and I got picked up by this dude who literally was on his way from the parole office. Actually, he was on his way from the dispensary because he had just got off parole. And he was like, bro, you look like shit. I was like, I'm kicking heroin. He's like, dude. He was like, here. And he handed me some weed, and I just smoked bowls. And I was like, thank you, God. This is what I needed to get me to probation. And I got there, and I was sitting outside because I didn't want to go inside because I knew if I went inside, they were going to arrest me. And she came out for her lunch, and she was like, what are you doing here? She's like, you can't be here. She's like, I got to arrest you. And like, I had the greatest probation officer ever. She just wanted me to succeed. And like, she thought if she gave me enough chances, I would get my shit together. And like, so that's what I told her. I said, you've given me enough rope to either hang myself or fucking tie it down. I said, and I don't want to live this life anymore. I said, and I don't know any other way to stop except to go to jail. And I was like, but I have one favor to ask you. I said, and you don't owe me nothing. So if you say no, it's cool. And she was like teary-eyed. And she's like, what is it? I said, I swore to myself I would never be dope sick in county jail again. Can I go to detox first? And she was like, yup. She was like, here, wait here. She came out. She gave me a McDonald's. Yeah. She gave me a Subway gift card and a bus pass. And she was like, here. She's like, please go eat because you look like you haven't eaten in 100 years. She's like, go to the hospital. She's like, and I'm going to tell them that you're coming. She's like, can you get there in an hour? I said, I could walk there in an hour. She's like, okay, cool. She was like, I'm counting on you. I was like, and I won't let you down. And I went to Subway. I got a sandwich. I ate it. Drank a soda on the way. Got on the bus. Went there. They put me in a locked room. Kept me in a locked room until a locked van came and got me and took me to a locked detox. And I stayed there for 5 days. And I called her and I said, I'm ready to go. And she said, okay. She said, can I trust you? And I said, yep. And she said, okay. She said, they'll give you bus fare to Fort Collins. Come see me. I went and saw her. And I didn't get high. And I went to jail. And there's actually on my social media, there's a picture of my last mugshot 9 years ago. And
Gee.
me holding my 9-year coin. But
Congratulations.
and over the next year, so for the first 5 years of my sobriety, right, because I don't discount that time. It didn't go away. I just had to do some more research. You know what I mean? Like, in my eyes, I got 16 years sober with a break in the middle. You know what I mean? But I had learned
you
a
had
lot
that
in the
spiritual
program.
awakening.
Absolutely. And
that was it.
You know, it even says, like we say in the program all the time, there's nothing worse than a head full of AA and a belly full of beer. It sucks, you know? And so I had all that. I had worked the steps 5 times. I had all this personal insight that, like, I don't know, everything I'm telling you about. I knew all of this, right? But what was missing was the forgiveness, because resentment is the number one offender. And I can talk about it till the day is long. But if I still hold a grudge against this person, or if I still,
like you're talking about your family from before,
I'm
like
talking about everything. I'm talking about from on the day I was born, I was taken away from my mother because my butthole was too small. I couldn't poop. And they took me into another state in Pennsylvania for the first month of my life. So for the first month of my life, I got to see my mom for 30 minutes. Like, that's like, if you know anything about trauma, that's trauma right there. That's like, they like, we know now through all the stuff that we know about birthing and stuff, that like the first hour, like they don't even interrupt the mom and the baby, because that's really crucial bonding time, that first couple months. You know what I mean? So I really had to look, first of all, I had to learn how to get over myself.
Right.
And because I had all this ego. Like, I believe there's big E ego and there's little E ego. Little E ego is like, yep, I built that house. I'm proud of it. You know, like, yeah, that's my kid that hit a home run. Or like, I've got 9 years sober. I've done the work to get here. That's okay. My ego was like, I was putting myself above God. I thought that it was all me and that it was me who did it. And that's what led me to going out, because I stopped going to meetings because people were like, hey, what's going on with you? And I'm like, fuck you, do your own inventory. You know, like, so I'm in different meetings, and then, like, you know, I'm kind of socially awkward, you know, especially if I'm sober. So like, I won't go to new meetings. So I just stopped going to meetings. You know, we all know how that, anybody in 12-step knows how that works out. You know, you ask anybody, usually around the nickels, 5, 10, 15, 20. Why'd you go out? Well, I stopped going to meetings. So like I said, there was one AA meeting a week that I went to in the jail. Because we had to, because I got into it's called a therapeutic community. It's like a rehab inside of jail. And I had a sponsor who came and was working the steps with me, but I focused more on going inward. I am a philosophy major and psychology, and I really love Carl Jung, and I love the whole concept of doing shadow work. So I started journaling. Like, I was a fiend for journaling. Like, I was a fiend for heroin. I wrote probably anywhere from 4 to 6 hours a day in my journal. I meditated anywhere from 4 to 6 hours a day. I used to sit on the jail yard while dudes were playing basketball and volleyball around me next to this tree and meditate with headphones on and my eyes closed, trying to learn, listening to really loud classical music, just trying to learn how to block out everything outward and only focus and listen what's inward. And I imagine myself, I'm not a very visual person, so I kept it simple. Like, there's a really good TV series from a few years ago that, if you guys ever are binge watchers or anything, you should check it out. It's called Mr. Robot.
Yes, with Rami Malek.
Yes, it dives so deep into mental health and
Christian Slater.
Yes, yep, yes, and
check it out, Danny. It's a brilliant show. Brilliant.
It really helped me understand my mental health. That and the movie Split by M. Night Shyamalan.
Oh my Golly, I
So
can't watch that thing again.
I've come to realize in my life that there's more than one me. There's little Tommy Tull, who was the little child inside of me who just wanted nothing more than his mom to love him and not beat him, his stepmom, and
Yeah.
for his dad to rescue him. So he built this wall. And then there's the teenage years when when I was this scared, weak teenager who was a liar and a weasel who just wanted people to like him. And then there was the me who, when I went on Grateful Dead tour, who all of a sudden found himself and became like Peter Pan to a group of lost boys, and like all of a sudden had this group of people who looked to me for leadership. And like, so there was these different parts who had these different roles. And when I was able to identify them and understand them, then I was able to envision us sitting around a campfire.
Yeah.
And I envisioned behind each section the different parts of the trauma of my life as shadows looming over these pieces of me. And I stayed in meditation and journaling until I was the one who held the conch around that fire, and until the light had been made bright enough that there were no more shadows. I remember sitting in these classrooms with these old school convicts who had taught me how to do time and taught me that we don't victimize women, children, and elderly, and you don't tell, and you stick to your word. And they're crying because their parents or their babysitters molested them, or their parents beat them, or their siblings teased them, or whatever. But I'm like watching these men that I respected, and I'm like, hold on, I can cry? Like, I'm allowed to do that? And because I had told myself when I was 12 years old, I was like, you can't cry, because if you ever cry again, it'll never stop.
Oh.
And we're watching Brene Brown videos, and I'm crying listening to Brene Brown talk about vulnerability as a great strength and not a weakness. And I'm like, yeah, give me more. And then we watched this old VHS tape of this guy who looked like a porn star from the 70s talking about you'll never truly be able to recover from any kind of trauma until you are able to change how you tell the story around it, and especially to yourself. He talked about taking ourselves and looking at our lives as a third party objective viewer, like a movie critic, and finding, where do we need to find forgiveness? Where do we need to find for other people? Where do we need to find forgiveness for ourselves? And we do this by, what do we know about the other characters' backstories, right? So I started thinking, okay, well, what do I know about my stepmom? Yeah, she was abusive. She was a piece of shit, but who is she? Who was she before I was in the picture? Well, what I knew was that her husband was an alcoholic teamster who used to go to work and come home and beat her and his kids. And my dad rescued her from that. So the narrative that I created for myself was that she viewed me as a threat to the family unit, that I was the only monkey wrench in the system. I was the only cog in the wheel that didn't quite fit. And and through that, I was able to find forgiveness for her. I was able to look back on my dad, look at his military career, the fact that he had, half a dozen kids through 4 different women and had been married like 7 times, or maybe even more. I don't even know the whole story. But he was a POW in Korea. He was shot in the leg and stabbed with a bayonet, escaping from a POW camp while carrying a friend of his who couldn't walk. You know what I mean? He was a Special Forces Green Beret Airborne Ranger, and he was trained to kill with impunity, to feel nothing but the recoil of his gun. And I'm sad because he didn't know how to love me, his grandson, who came along when he thought he was at the end of his kid career. You know what I mean? So there's all these factors that when I looked at them, I'm like, holy shit, it's got nothing to do with me. I just happen to be the focal point of the aggression, of the rage, of the neglect, of the disassociation. And in finding forgiveness for them, I was able to find forgiveness for myself, because I'm a personal believer that the first time I ever got dope sick and withdrew and then chose to go back and get high again, that's my fault. Like, addiction is a choice. When we're not using and we choose to get high, that's a choice. Now, once we get high, we kind of lose the choice of whether we get to stop or not. But that
Mm.
first time is always a choice, and it's not the last drink or drug, it's the first one. So I never really
So
wanted to
Rex,
blame
let me
anybody
ask
else.
you,
Yeah, yeah,
just
yeah.
because, and sorry to interrupt.
No,
I
no,
mean, your
no.
story is, I mean, I haven't said a word for an hour because I'm just really amazed by your story, really. And thank you for sharing it. We're running a
Absolutely.
little short on time. I want to talk about the No Love Foundation.
Okay, absolutely.
Let's talk about that.
When I wrote, so it was through the love of my friends, and God, that I was able to get where I am today. My partner, my wife. When I wrote my book, this was one of the last tattoos I got in prison. It says "No Love,"
I
KNOWLOVE.
love it.
There I see it.
It's because
It's a
it's
good
not very
one.
well done. It's kind of punk rock, but that's who I am. I'm not very well
That's right.
done. I'm kind of punk rock,
That's
a little
right.
rough around the edges. And I started in my studies throughout my life. I've learned that to know love is to know God. To know God is to know love. And
Mm.
I have
Love
decided
that.
that I was a taker for almost 3 decades. So now I want to
Mm.
be a giver, and I try to give myself in service. And so I wrote my book because the pandemic hit. I had nothing better to do. I had been talking about it for years, so I finally put it on paper. I published it in January of this year. It's called No Love, a memoir. After being a guest on several podcasts to promote it, some people were like, "Hey, man, you should start your own podcast. You got a lot to say, and people need to hear it." And so
Right.
me and my wife, we started, because she has a lot of trauma and stuff from her life,
Yeah.
and her past. So we started the podcast. It's called No Love, the memoir continues. And we started a nonprofit foundation called No Love Foundation. And we are a third party fundraiser for whatever it is we're working on. And when I started promoting the book and the podcast, I got really involved in social media. Before, it was just kind of keep in touch with friends and stuff.
Yeah.
And I got on TikTok, and I kind of blew up a little bit, kind of quick. I got like almost 15,000 followers in a few months. And
Great.
this past June, I started seeing all these TikToks about Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, and started seeing the statistics about suicide rates in this country. On average, 130 individuals a day take their own life, and 80% of
Mm.
that number is men.
Oh my
70%
God.
of that number is
That's
middle-aged white men.
horrifying.
And like, I try not to be political, but like, it kind of seems like white men are under attack in the media. And like, and I hate the patriarchy just as much as everybody else, but that's like 1% of a whole. And then there's the other 99% of us that are out here who are just struggling, trying to feed our fucking families, and trying not to get high, or trying to get high, or whatever, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? But like,
Right.
I started to feel like there was something that I could do to reduce that number, because I've been there. I know what it's like. I know what it's like to
Yeah.
feel like I can't cry, I can't talk about my feelings, I can't emote, because that means that I'm weak, and I'm not a man. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
that's toxic masculinity, is believing
Mm.
that men aren't allowed to show emotions, that we're not allowed to cry. I
Yeah.
cry and often now. Like, it's
Yeah. So
called,
does Chris. He's always
yeah.
tearing up on all the time.
If you take the
Very
word
much.
E off the word emotion,
Proud
what
of
are you
it.
left with? Right? If you take E off emotion, what are you left with? Motion. We have to allow our feelings to flow, and crying is, it's cleansing for the soul, you know. So I started talking with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and I started asking what I could do, and they said, "Well, what do you think you can do?" And I said, "Let me get back to you." And I started researching what the longest recognized coast to coast trail is in the United States, and it's about 4,200 miles. And I said, I can do 1,000 miles better than that. And
Jesus.
so I've partnered with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and on June 25th of 2023, I will be departing from Seattle, Washington. My next major destination will be San Francisco, California, and then from San Francisco, I'll be going to Denver. From Denver to Washington, D.C., and from Washington, D.C. to Miami. That's a 5,800 plus mile bicycle ride across the United States, from the furthest northwest tip to the most southern east tip.
You know what? I
Um,
might have to be at your final destination because I
you are
live in
absolutely
Florida, and that
nice.
is an amazing thing that you're doing.
It's
How
going
are
to
Oh,
be
you
yeah.
preparing
something.
for this?
I am riding as much as I can.
Jesus.
It sucks because I have to work, and I'm partially
Yeah.
disabled, so I can't work a lot, but I'm having to work a lot more because life is not getting any cheaper. So we have a GoFundMe set up, which 80% of the funds that we raise will go to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. The other 20% is to help me and my family train over the next 7 months. Because my family's going to be my road crew. We're going to document the whole thing and try and do a documentary. We're just trying to raise as much awareness and as much money for outreach and
Cool.
awareness as possible. This past July, we had legislation passed that there's no more big 10-digit number you got to dial if you're feeling suicidal. Now you can just dial 988. And you don't
Wow.
even have to call. You could just text the word talk to 741-741, and someone will text you back. There are trained professionals and people who have been affected by suicide. They say every suicide affects at least 6 people. So if there's 130 people killing themselves every day, that's almost 1,000 people every day that are being affected by someone's choice. And
Wow.
women attempt suicide 1.5 times more than men, but men succeed almost 4 times more than women. And
Killer, man.
in 2020 alone, there was over 45,000 suicides. 2021 saw a little bit of a drop in that, which is a good thing. We just want to keep on bringing it down. You can go to our website, nolovefoundation.org, or you can go to ride4life.org, or no, rideforlifeusa.org. Takes you to the same place, but the event is called Ride for Life USA. You can find out all the information there. Show your support by donating or sharing. Even just sharing the post is helping immensely, because if 10 people see it, then that's 10 people that would have never seen it. You know what I'm saying?
Sure, absolutely.
And everybody has a following these days. Everybody, whether it's 100 on Facebook or if it's 100,000 on Instagram or 1 million on TikTok. It doesn't matter. I'm trying. I hope somebody out there hears this who knows somebody, but I'm trying to get Vanilla Ice or Owen Wilson to retweet or repost one of our things.
Nice.
They both have experience with suicide attempts and opiates.
Right.
You know what I mean? All it takes is for one big celebrity to retweet it, and then bam, you got 1 million people who are on board. So,
That's really
but
cool.
if it's just me and my wife and my daughter next year doing the whole thing by ourselves, at least that I'll know that I did my part. And
Think big. Think big, Reverend.
And
Think
we're
big.
gonna push out the message too.
with
Oh,
God on my
yeah.
side, when I fail. You know what I'm
Uh,
saying? With God on our
Needless
side,
to say.
It's gonna
yes,
be exactly the way it's supposed to be, right?
absolutely. That is what I try to tell everybody in my life. It was meant to be any other way, then that's how it would be.
Right.
All is right
Reverend,
with the world because this is how it is.
that's it. And Rev, I've got to thank you. That we do a lot of these interviews. I think this is around about our 20th one that we've done this year, Danny.
Actually,
But
we're on 31.
31,
Keep
geez
up, Chris.
Louise.
Keep up, Chris.
But but very few this year have actually been so captivating. And yours is one of them. The first one I think that really brought us big emotion was Tim Lodgen. So from the bottom of both of our hearts, thank you so much for appearing on the show. We'd love to have you back at some given point or another. And a tremendous thank you to you for tuning in. If you've missed out on the live stream, don't worry. You're more than welcome to check this out on demand, which is available on all the big platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. Again, great thanks to Reverend Rex. I'm Chris Nell. That's Daniela Park. Remember, life is always better when you're doing life sober. Until next week that we meet, goodbye.
Thank you, Reverend.
Thank you. Namaste.
Namaste.
God
Thank
bless.
you, Chris.
God bless you.